Hi, I am Tomas Guevara, and this is the channel Rewriting the Reality. I just got an email from the Science Alert magazine, published on July 31, 2023, by David Neild. The title is, "We may have found the part of the brain where conscious experience lives." Before I proceed to transcribing this email, please subscribe to this channel. You will learn a lot about your brain. I am going to number the ideas these people have in order to confirm or debunk it. The email said the following: new research sheds light on a tricky idea of consciousness. 1. There's a difference between what the brain takes in and what we're consciously aware of taking in. Scientists now think they've pinpointed the brain region where that conscious awareness is managed. The team, from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel and the University of California, Berkeley, in the U.S., found sustained brain activity in the occipitotemporal area of the visual cortex in the back of the brain. 2. While this activity dropped to around 10 to 20% of its level about 300 milliseconds after an original visual stimulus, the pattern of activity remained while the stimulus was viewed. 3. That was in contrast to other brain areas, where information disappeared entirely within half a second, 500 milliseconds. 4. This stable representation suggests a neural basis for stable perception over time, despite the changing level of activity, says psychologist Leon Dial from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. 5. In other words, this neural region is where we not just notice something but also notice that we're noticing it. As the visual stimulus changed, a series of images, so did the brain activity recorded by the researchers. Machine learning algorithms then filtered out the noise and spot patterns. 6. Researchers enlisted 10 epilepsy patients for the study who were already scheduled to have electrodes fitted inside their skulls. These electrodes allow for a more complete measure of brain activity over time, with less guesswork, compared with other brain scanning methods that work externally. We are adding a piece to the puzzle of consciousness, how things remain in your mind's eye for you to act on, says psychologist Robert Knight from UC Berkeley. 7. The researchers can't say for sure how their findings relate to consciousness, but they suggest that the sustained activity in the visual cortex could be fed back to the prefrontal cortex, where thoughts and actions are managed. There remains a lot of scientific debate about how this all does or doesn't work. After damage to one brain hemisphere following a stroke, for example, some people experience unilateral neglect. They only consciously perceive half a photo or scene but emotionally react to it in its entirety. Ultimately, further research and data gathering, which leads to a better understanding of consciousness, could help restore the brain when conditions such as unilateral neglect take hold. What is required for something not only to be sensed by the brain but for you to have a subjective experience? Says Dial. Understanding that would eventually help us understand what is missing in the cognitive system and in the brains of patients who have this kind of a syndrome. The research has been published in Cell Reports. Let's start with a professional analysis, they said. There's a difference between what the brain takes in and what we're consciously aware of taking in. In my opinion, to build something robust, you must have strong bases. The problem is that they are analyzing the brain, not what consciousness is. It is like analyzing a breaker and not analyzing the energy that passes through it. First, we are not the brain, therefore we are always conscious of everything. This can easily be demonstrated under hypnosis. Just put an individual under a deep trance, then ask him or her to detail anything that happens since he or she left the house to go to the workplace. The individual can relate second by second what happened around in his or her way to the workplace. The research mentioned that, after damage to one brain hemisphere following a stroke, for example, some people experience unilateral neglect. They only consciously perceive half a photo or scene but emotionally react to it in its entirety. Let me explain how this happened. First, our senses, in this case, our eyes, send signals to the brain of half of the photo. The photo is made of links of consciousness. The subjective self can see these links of consciousness and reconfigure the photo entirely and send this information to the brain. Therefore, the brain gets 100% of the information. According to the science community, consciousness is what allows you to think, remember, and feel things, and this is incorrect. We are the consciousness, but consciousness, with capital C, is more than us. Therefore, to differentiate us from consciousness, with capital C, that is everything, we labeled us essences. To experience something, we create this something first, using our perceptions mechanism. Once we experience this something, this will be recorded, no in our brain, but in our consciousness. Of course, when you see what you have created, the neurons of your brain will immediately turn on and off, because you are using your beliefs to analyze what you created. Then, if you are remembering this something, the neurons of your brain will turn on and off because the brain is analyzing again this something that you are remembering. And of course, you can come to another conclusion of what you originally saw and what you are remembering now. And of course, you can take some actions based on what your brain is analyzing, or reanalyzing, and this is your objective self doing it, following the analysis of the brain, or we can put it better by saying, following the recommendations of the brain. But in some cases, your subjective self can take the decision and we call it following the intuition. This information I just gave you will answer the point that I marked as 2 and 3. And this have to do with the importance that we give to what we are experiencing. The stable representation mentioned in point 4 is also related to the importance we give to what we saw or felt, but this will be never forget, because it is recorded within our consciousness, not in the body consciousness that is completely different. This will explain the situation I marked in point 5. In regard to consciousness, they think that the hardest phenomena to explain is its fundamental feature, that is its subjectivity. In reality, is not hard at all, if you equate subjectivity with free will. That is why we divide ourself in two, objective and subjective. Let me give you an example. You can walk around any place naked, that is you free will. But there are some objective guidelines that tell us that this is against the law, and therefore you will think twice to walk naked in Central Avenue. We created the laws based on our beliefs, because what damage will you cause walking naked in Central Avenue? Probably you will only cause damage to yourself, being punched by some irritated individual, or thrown in prison by the police. Point 6 mentioned that they enlisted 10 epilepsy patients for the study. To these patients, they are going to connect electrodes for a more complete measure of brain activity, but measuring the brain activity is not the same as measuring consciousness. In episode 26, I explained the cause of epilepsy. Remember that our senses are always sending signals to our brain. The consciousness of the body sends signal to the brain too, like I need rest, nutrition, sleep, deep desires, etc. Now when the signals contradict your beliefs, they cause a short circuit in your brain, epilepsy. Usually, 1 week after death, the body consciousness ceases to exist and becomes something else. Of course, that includes the consciousness of your brain. But your consciousness continues exploring other realities. You left a copy of what we could call your worldview in the regional area 3 of the universal consciousness for others to access. You can also leave a deposit of energy in some place of your neighborhood or at your home, and anyone can interact with this deposit of energy, and because it's energy, anyone can reconfigure it. Usually this is what we call ghosts. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel.